Hey guys, what's going on? Dr. Slim here, and today I'll be bringing you guys 5 beginner tips that would have helped me out tremendously on my very first playthrough of Dark Souls 3. Now, if you don't know much about Dark Souls, it is a very punishing video game where if you make a mistake, the game will make sure to let you know that you fucked up. I would also highly recommend playing this game blind, and if you'd prefer to do that, I would leave this video now because there will be some minor spoilers of the very beginning of the game. I don't want to advise you too much on what class to pick, as I'll leave that up to you because it will allow for more freedom and you'll in the end most likely have more fun with the game. But the one bit of advice I will recommend about classes is if this is your first time playing, do not pick Deprived. Let's get to it. Tip 1. Micromanaging. A huge part of this game is micromanaging yourself when in certain encounters. When battling enemies, you have to make sure to keep an eye on your health, the red bar, stamina, the green bar, and depending on your playstyle, your FP or your mana, which is the blue bar. While doing this, you need to also position yourself properly against your enemy, giving yourself an advantage and being ready for anything. Every enemy acts very differently, so it might take a few encounters of the same enemy to really feel like you have them down. Things get even more complicated once you're forced to deal with multiple enemies at a time. At that point, you have to deal with everything I said before, but while keeping your eyes on multiple enemies and making sure none of them work your way behind you and get that backstab on you. Usually if it's a couple weaker enemies, it won't be too bad, but most of the time there'll at least be one stronger enemy in the horde. At that point, you want to figure out which enemies or which type of enemies you'll want to prioritize first based on what your biggest weakness is so far. For example, as a meleeer who's specialized in a sword and shield, you might find dealing with melee enemies to be much easier than dealing with enemies attacking you from a range. If at all possible, you would then want to try and take out the ranged enemies first, and then deal with the melee enemies afterwards. And then if you're attacking with range, it might be vice versa. Although, if you've tried some of these things many times, and it does not seem to be working for you at all, there's a chance it most likely won't ever fully work as you planned. That leads me to my second tip. Tip 2. Approach encounters from different aspects and angles. Let me start this section by saying the obvious if you haven't noticed so far. You are going to die. A lot, most likely. Don't let it frustrate you, especially early on, because that's just part of the learning curve of this game. This is not one of those games where you can expect yourself to jump in and be able to handle almost anything in the game right off the bat with the right upgrades. At some points it may even start to feel overwhelming, but take a sec and slow down and try and look at the encounter with a more tactical type of view. For example, you might figure out that if you only push up a certain amount, you will pull one of the 3 enemies ahead of you, making it so you can take that one out, then deal with the other 2. Or you could notice that 2 enemies are very close together, and you can take them out at the same time. Like I said earlier, I guess just keep your eyes open and always be willing to try different things until you figure out what truly works for you. This will not only get you ready for more complex and difficult encounters, but you'll learn enemies faster, figure out what and what doesn't work. It can also be a hell of a lot of fun if you mix the use of consumables in there, but early on I would not recommend using them too often. They are rare and expensive in the early game. Tip number 3. Try out different weapons and armor setups. This kind of goes along with my last tip also, but this is a lot more complicated, so I wanted to make its own section. Just like any RPG, enemies have different weaknesses, strengths, etc. Unfortunately, there's no direct way to see what affects what enemy how, so the community usually comes together and compiles a list on the wiki on what enemy is weak to what. Though, with some mild experimenting, you can most of the time figure it out on your own, but not the exact percentages. Anyways guys, let's just jump right into the offensive stats. Looking at the weapon here, you can see it does 66 physical damage plus 17. This means that this weapon does a total of 84 damage. Physical damage. Now, other certain weapons, even melee weapons, will have attack power in magic, fire, lightning, and dark. Obviously, those weapons will deal whatever type of damage they have it listed in. Weapons can deal multiple types of damage, but I am unsure how they exactly add that up when you physically deal damage to an enemy. I am also unsure what critical does exactly, but I know it has an effect with the amount of damage you do when doing a backstab or a parry. The additional effects are bleed, which is after a bar on your screen is shown. After that bar is filled up, it will deal a massive amount of damage to you. Toxic, which is like a poison effect and will have a damage over time effect for a pretty damn long time. And Frostbite, which will deal a small amount of damage plus slow down your stamina regen significantly. Now, what does it mean by 66 plus 17? This means that the base damage of the weapon is 66 plus 17 extra damage because of the weapon scaling. What weapon scaling is, you see the attribute bonus on the bottom, correct? The letter next to it indicates how much of an effect of extra damage that specific stat gives that weapon. For example, the Bandit's Knife has descaling in strength and dexterity. That means that the more points you put into strength and dexterity, the more extra damage that this weapon will do. The later two options are intelligence and faith. The amount of scaling damage it gives you is based on the attribute letter, which I believe are E through S. Now take a look at the guard absorption category. Now this section is mainly for when you two-hand a weapon or if you're using a shield. Listed again obviously are physical, magic, fire, lightning, dark, plus the added stability. Next to the 5 attributes are percentage numbers saying the amount of damage reduction you will receive while blocking with this weapon. For example, if you are blocking against a physical attack with this dagger, you will only receive 65% of the total damage it would have dealt. Shields obviously usually provide the best overall, but shields also have way better stability, which is how well you'll recover from said hit. Let's move on to armor. Now unfortunately, I don't know the armor stats as in depth as the melee stats, but here is essentially how this works. Obviously, the higher the number in the absorption category, the less damage you'll receive from those types of attacks. Resistances provide how effective bleed, poison, frost, and curse are against you. What that means is the higher the resistance, the slower the effect bars fill up. Now, I didn't go over curse before because it isn't listed under the other category, but what it does, once the bar is fully full, you're dead. It kills you right there on the spot. I am unsure exactly how poise works also, but I believe it's along the lines of like how strong you tank the attack. So like for how long you recover, etc., etc. As you can tell, there's kind of a lot going on with all the combat in this game. Don't get overwhelmed though. The more you play, the more natural and the more right everything will feel in the end. Anyways guys, back to the main point of this tip. Use as many different weapons and different armors and different shields and different setups as you can. The main reason I say that is you can't judge weapons and armor purely off of stats, especially weapons. For example, you might find a weapon that does slightly less damage than the weapon you're using now, but it could be slightly faster, or it could be the same speed to a little bit slower, but have a way better moveset that you like way more. Or you could also find a weapon that has superior stats in every single way, but it moves so slow and has such a shitty moveset you can't stand to use it. My point is, you won't know any of that unless you experiment and try with everything. And in the end, you'll find your true play style, how you want to play, and you will have a vast much more fun experience playing this game. Tip number 4. Explore everywhere. Dark Souls is known for its complicated, not so in-your-face story that's going on behind the scenes, while providing you with some of the most aesthetically pleasing areas in all of video games. Everything is beautiful and there for a reason. In the end, almost everywhere will feel like a maze because usually the areas wrap around with themselves. In the end, that's intended therefore to make the areas feel like they truly could be real places. Now there are 2 mechanics while exploring you should keep in mind that return from other Dark Souls games. First up is the illusionary wall. An illusionary wall is a regular wall that actually is a secret door essentially. To activate them in this game, you simply just walk up to them and slash them once. Unfortunately, some are in some very obvious areas while other ones are hidden in places you never would have guessed, so you might as well just run around slashing every single wall. Okay, not every wall, but don't be afraid to slash walls that you're suspicious of. Also, shortcuts are back. There are many shortcuts in this game just to make little pathways to bosses easier so you don't have to deal with any enemies. You know, just little things like that, just everywhere. Always try and go around and backtrack a little bit, except from a different way, because in the end you might find a much quicker way there. Tip number 5. Allotting your skill points smartly. Unfortunately, if you're not the smartest person with your skill points, you can screw yourself pretty early on in this game. Fortunately, it'd be really hard to accidentally screw up because you'd have to put almost every single skill point into a magic area as a meleeer and vice versa. Which stats for which, you ask? Well, I'm going to go over the 9 main stats real quick and we'll figure that out. Vigor is health, attunement is FP or mana, endurance is stamina, vitality is inventory space, strength is heavy melee weapons, dexterity is light melee weapons, intelligence is used for requirements to cast spells, miracles, pyromancies, and etc., and it also is slightly used for scaling. Faith is also needed to use some miracles, pyromancies, and spells, and is also used for scaling. Luck is item discovery chance. As a meleeer, you're going to want to use both strength and dexterity, as most weapons have some sort of scaling for both on them. Though in the end you should still put more points into this melee style that you prefer. When you use magic, you'll want to put most of your points into intelligence and faith. With magic it gets a little more complicated there. Whichever one you want to end up putting more skill points into is depending on if you're a pyromancer, if you're focusing on miracle, if you're focusing on sorceries. Every class is going to have to dump a lot of points into vigor. Mage classes are going to dump more points into attunement. Melee classes are going to dump more points into endurance. Most likely as a melee build you'll also need more points in vitality, but it would still come in handy as a mage. Few points in luck is also pretty helpful, but not very necessary. One thing about inventory space real quick, it's only affected by the items you actually have equipped, not the items in your inventory. Also, if you're at 70% or lower of your total weight, you will get a faster roll that is much better than the slow roll. In the end, if you do mess up a lot in your skills, you can reset yourself. I'll put down in the description exactly how to do that if you want to spoil some more about this game to yourself, but I wouldn't recommend looking at it unless you absolutely need to. Anyways guys, those are my 5 tips to get you started in the realm of Dark Souls. Enjoy. This is a beautiful game. Take your time. And most importantly, have fun, guys. Thanks for watching.